My name is Ashley Shannon. I'm the Operational Excellence Leader with the State Emergency Management Agency. Today's presentation is titled Emergency Management Access and Functional Needs Disability Awareness. Our presenter today is Dave Whalen. Over to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you. Ashley, just let me know if people can't hear. I'll keep my video on for a couple of minutes, folks, just to introduce myself and show you some of the products that we're going to have. So I'll turn it off for the remainder and turn it back on at the end for questions. Again, I'm Dave Whalen. I'm with Niagara University. We're up here in Niagara Falls, New York. Outside of my office, I can see Canada. We are the nation's premier program for first responder disability awareness training. We've been in your state for 6 years with our firefighter EMS, 911, and law enforcement program. That'll come to an end. We've been funded by the Missouri Developmental Disabilities Council, as you can see on the screen. Our emergency management program is about 15 years in the making, and we are now in your state funded this year for a 3-year grant that will ultimately culminate with me coming to the state starting in early spring, late winter, early spring, to debut our 2-day training sessions across the 9 regions. Plus, we'll probably have an additional tack on 1 or 2. A quick history with my limited time here today on how this all came about. As I said, it's about 15 years of culmination of development specific to roles I've been involved with from a disability advocacy standpoint. I've been in the field of disability since 1986. I was a development disability service provider for Niagara County, where I'm at right now, ARC, the ARC. I became a parent of a child with a developmental disability, now a 25-year-old adult male. My son, who's a power wheelchair user, speech disability, seizure disorder, learning disability, actually works for me a day of the week out of the office here. I did that. As progressing on to disability awareness training, my sister, an idea from her, everything as an association. We look to work closely with the Emergency Management Association in your state, whereby one of her clients was getting blasted by disability rights advocates and needed to find a way to present this topic. That's what's led me here today. I've done about 650 trainings in disability awareness, about 300 in first and emergency response. This program was originally funded in New York State by the sister program to Missouri DDC, the New York State DDC. And you are the 5th state we are in. We're also in Louisiana, Nebraska, South Dakota, and soon to be Utah, it looks like. The intentions are simple in terms, but complex in content. And that is understanding how to properly respond to people with disabilities and access and functional needs. I'll define those terms shortly. Long gone are the terms special needs or terms that are archaic like handicap that don't properly identify the population, especially in the context of what we're talking about here today. When I do come to this state, it will be certainly announced across all sectors, and our audience is eclectic. I have a lot of trainings in my queue. This is one of 2 of about 50 trainings in my queue where it's an eclectic audience. So when I train 911 telecommunicators, it's just them. When I train law enforcement, it's just them. When I train school teachers, it's just them. When I do this training, it's everyone who has stock in the game. Emergency management offices, state offices, Department of Health, Red Cross, the disability organizations across the state, Commission for the Blind, Commission for the Deaf, etc., because everyone needs to hear the same message. Most of you folks, if and when you do attend, will also be speaking because there's no such thing as an expert in this topic. We rely on expertise across the professionals in attendance and those that would know much better than, say, I on topics like incident command or NIMS and such. Our product, I'm going to show this to you now in flash, is the Inclusive Planning Active Participation Manual. Note, we don't say emergency management per se. This is for everyone who attends, and this is really everything you need to know on this topic area. And I'll explain as we get more into this. There are some sidebars that come with what we provide. For instance, this wonderful tool from the Department of Health and Human Services, Capacity Building Toolkit for Including Aging and Disability Networks and Emergency Planning. So fortunately or unfortunately, our product comes with a lot of homework because this is an ongoing topic area. It never comes off an agenda with the ultimate objective, a core advisory group. A lot of where this came from is based on Katrina and the Post-Katrina Act. Our first exposure to challenges and response of people with disabilities was the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. But the Post-Katrina itself and the post-Katrina Act exposed the challenges we had with this population. Being in Louisiana, it's very telling. I was there last week, and again, it's too difficult to talk about some of this stuff, especially with some of the content that we have specific to Katrina in that audience, amongst other audiences, of course. FEMA recognized that challenge, and the Post-Katrina Act started what they call the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. Bear with me if this is standard knowledge. What they did then have was 2 training sessions at the Emergency Management Institute in Maryland, integrating access and functional needs into emergency planning. I was lucky to be one of about 30 people in the country that was attended that and was identified as a trainer for FEMA on that topic area. However, they never deployed us. So part of what my content is actually what FEMA wants us to learn. Our program is recognized by FEMA Region 2 and other players across different sectors of FEMA. Let me turn off the video here. I will come back around if I need to flash you anything else and continue to talk from this point forward. I will take questions in the chat box at the end. So please feel free to input. Ashley's going to monitor those for me, and I'll save about 10, 15 minutes towards the end to take questions, which also includes your input, folks. We develop our content specific to each state. So I would very much welcome your response, be it in chat or discussion at the end of this presentation or anytime post this presentation, if indeed you have thoughts on what we should have Missouri specific or questions on what we might have in general. We've done this program now 32 times across 4 states. So we feel we're pretty comfortable where we're at. The response has been very positive from your peers in those other states. And quite frankly, we've been talking about it in your state for a while. Many of you probably know Dante Glenecki. Dante and I have had this discussion for about 4 years, including yesterday. So we've already received some real quality input from some of your peers and people to know. But please, we want to get your input. We want to be sure it's covering topics that you are going to want to be sure are covered. Again, I think we're pretty comfortable with that, but we want to hear from you. The course objectives define access and functional needs and disabilities. Notice not just response to people with disabilities. I'll explain that more in a minute. Define key terms related to inclusive planning. The objective is that people with disabilities and access and functional needs are at the table. It doesn't work if they're not. Identify appropriate resources to assist in planning for and with adults and children with disabilities and others with access and functional needs. So again, the manual I just flashed at you, we're pretty comfortable and confident that there's a lot of content that is going to cover that area specific to resources. And what we do in each state is get state specific from resources. We actually already have a Missouri link on our website. You see our website down at the bottom corner there, that you can access and identify or find those resources, those community partners, which we really push in this product, but just information on disability organizations and the like. So I ask you to access that site in advance, take a good look at it. And by all means, if you see something missing, again, let us know, but start to use it now. We have a big section on emergency on this topic here, as you can imagine. Identify the essentiality of inclusive practices, why it's so essential to have this topic and learn about this topic and incorporate this topic, and then how to incorporate access and function needs in all phases of emergency management. It can be complex. We have some outstanding checklists, which really drive a lot of what we're doing with this. You can talk it for 2 full days and give a lot of information, but checklists kind of make it simplify the process of ensuring that you're doing it right, or that there is the process is moving along appropriately. Understand disabilities as it pertains to this topic area. We define disability. It's a vast word. Everyone needs disability awareness training. I told you I have about 50 trainings in my queue, and the intent is that audiences are getting customized content specific to their profession or their interest. So specific to this topic area, let's define disability and understand how it comes to play. Our content, for instance, on firefighter EMS training is lengthier, specific to defining disabilities, and distinctly different, by the way, just the same, while there'll certainly be crossovers. And then we have a federal law out there, the ADA. And what does it say about emergency management? We use the ADA as our ally not as a bane, but as an asset. They have excellent information that directs us, and also checklists that I was referencing a minute ago. Those checklists and beyond with some other professionals that we have hired to work with you, work with Missouri through us. This is actually a FEMA slide, and there's a video that goes with it that I don't have time to show today. But unable to evacuate before or during Hurricane Katrina, Benilda told her friend the water was rushing into her home just before her phone went dead. Her body and wheelchair were found floating inside her home several days later. She's unfortunately become the poster person for all things specific to this topic here. You can imagine when I show this in Louisiana that I certainly give a trigger warning and the concerns that may come with that. But what was also exposed here was the issues in transportation, the understanding of first responders and how to accommodate her and get her to the Superdome. The supports that she had in her life, personal care assistant, and how that person was and wasn't able to assist in the same breath, and then her role with that. I'm just going to show you a video, actually just one video in this presentation, folks, but I'm going to give you one specific to a disability, but note the title here, Dispelling the Myths of Cerebral Palsy. You've all heard of cerebral palsy. Do you know how to define it? What does it mean? How does it come to play? How does it present? You've all heard of autism, traumatic brain injury, Tourette syndrome, ... So what we need to do is understand disability, how it comes to play in the context of this topic or in general. And when I say everyone needs disability awareness training, I'm talking about the 7-Eleven clerk right now, just up the road, just the same. But understanding it in that context. And what we often find is that people with their own definition lack full base knowledge. There's some inaccuracies or a lot of inaccuracies, and there's misperceptions. And that puts us in a very bad spot when we're doing any form of emergency or first response. So you've heard of autism spectrum disorders. Every disability has a spectrum or an array or a vast array. They don't present the same. So this one video will be somewhat, while representative of one disability, will also be representative of disabilities across the disability spectrum and how we understand them or lack thereof. I will also give a tip here. My son is also in this video.
I have cerebral palsy.
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 My disability is cerebral palsy. I don't have an intellectual disability.
I go to grad school.
I advocate.
I go to high school.
I work at a major bank.
I have a bachelor's and master's degree in social work.
I'm a college graduate.
I drive my own car.
I live in my own apartment in the city of Buffalo.
I live in this house.
I vote.
I go to church.
I attend ball games.
I'm active in my church.
I have a girlfriend.
On my own house.
I like to go to the movies. I like to go swimming.
I take singing lessons.
I drive a car.
I like rock.
I run a non-for-profit charity.
I vote.
I'm on the board of directors of Niagara Cerebral Palsy.
I have a job in the community.
I may need a little assistance and support, but see me as I am.
Go to science fiction conventions.
I play baseball.
I participate in triathlons and half marathons.
I go to movies.
And I'm married.
If I come to your workplace, are there barriers?
Do you know how to handle a person with a disability in an emergency or crisis?
Respect that. Accessible talking about.
I have big dreams and high expectations for myself. Do you know what they are?
And I prefer if you pull up a chair if we're going to have a long conversation.
Occasionally I may need your help, but please respect me for the adult that I am.
People with cerebral palsy live, work, and recreate in your community.
So quite an array there, to say the least. people with speech disabilities, people without, people who ambulate, people who use manual wheelchairs, power wheelchairs, people working in the community. I think one of the points we make with this video, and sorry it was a little off center here, I don't know what that's about, is we also see competence. And we tend to view people with disabilities as not being competent or equal. The Obama administration recognized people with disabilities as the most discriminated minority in the country. You go poll 25 people this afternoon and ask them the most discriminated minority, you might go 0 for 25 with people saying people with disabilities. So we have a gap here, and it comes to play specific to this topic area, amongst other topic areas. You also were exposed to augmentative communication. So some etiquette in there, pulling up a chair if we're going to have a long conversation. And who's thinking that someone with cerebral palsy is running triathlons and half marathons? Raise your hand if you do. So when we talk about the vast array of abilities and talents, we tend to sometimes view a general topic area in disability or disability as a whole as not being able to be as competent, something we need to overcome. So defining access and functional needs. Again, a FEMA concept, very much welcome in this discipline because it takes us beyond what does special needs mean, again, an archaic term, and defines it in the context of emergency management. I actually use this outside the scope as well. Action services, accommodations, and programmatic architectural communication modifications. Note the term modifications and accommodations. They go hand in hand. Reasonable accommodations and modifications, you might have heard that term. That cover any must undertake or provide to people with disabilities. So what we talk about here is not a maybe. Everything I'm talking about here today is a must. And how do we achieve that and get to that point? So in defining what it is, it's 10 points. It's not just a disability community, as you'll see. It's people who come from diverse cultures, races, and nations of origin. So we learned a little bit about cultural awareness to the extent it's going to come to play. Nations of origin and different ways people would present or how they would be need to be accommodated if need be or able to. Followed by people who can't read. My son, Tom Cruise, Richard Branson, Charles Schwab, people who can't read, have limited English proficiency or are non-English speaking. I saw this today on Heritage Month fact that the number 2 country in the world that speaks Spanish is the United States. Mexico is the only larger country. We are number 2. American Sign Language is the 4th most used language in this country. How well do you know it? And we can't be in a position where we don't know it. We teach you American Sign Language. We give you the opportunity to understand the basic science. We provide you with pocket guides on ASL specific to emergencies. Older adults with or without disabilities, 65 plus, where about 50% have some form of functional limitation. And I'll define disability for you as well, because we don't define it by the terms I just used or other terms: cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, traumatic brain injury. Children with or without disabilities, individuals have economical or transportation needs. Takes on a whole nother meaning here. Shelter in place, 3 to 7 days. The pandemic blew that out of the water. Do I have the ability to shelter in place for 3 to 7 days? Is there enough food in my fridge, in my pantry? Maybe in yours, but everyone else's? Transportation. We need to evacuate Joplin. I don't have a car. I got a family of 4. Is there room for anyone have room for 4 in their car or in their vehicle? So that's where we identify that greater sense specific to economical. And when you talk about people with disabilities, it's also the poorest minority in the country, least employed. So some of those luxuries that aren't luxuries in our life are going to come to play and may be devastating specific to this topic area. Women who are pregnant, especially late term. People with chronic medical conditions, dialysis, other needs. Those with pharmacological dependencies. I have a very good friend of mine who has schizophrenia. He's been with me. I've been friends with him my whole life. He gets his monthly shot that's kept him out of the psych unit for 5 years. He's doing great. Steve's doing fantastic. He can't miss that monthly shot or he's going to decline vastly. We'll talk about the recovery model CMIST at the end of this that addresses some of that content. This is in the moment or post. Social advocacy and service organizations, social services, Meals on Wheels, independent living centers, developmental disability service providers, all come to play here. Their activities that people rely on, their functions that people utilize. And people with disabilities. What we're looking at here, folks, is about 60 to 70% of each community's population. That's the statistic. And if people question that, let me cut it in half. Go from 2/3 to 1/3. That's still a lot of people. CDC states 26% of the American population has a disability, but we don't look at disability in the context of emergency planning and preparedness. We look at functional needs and limitations. What might a person need specific to disabilities? Here it is. Let's define all those, which we do. How does that come to play? What is adaptive equipment, durable medical equipment, assistive technology? We define that. We also give you the resources to utilize that. We'll also be able to assist people with the emergency managers, Red Cross, other key players in the municipal roles. They'll be identified on where we can get those resources in advance, loan closets. And what is it? What might personal preparedness be? Person recognize they have a disability. The 30 million plus Americans that have a cognitive disability, do they recognize they have a disability that will need assistance? The 5.7 million Americans with Alzheimer's disease, these 7 million Americans with intellectual disability, the 5.3 million Americans with traumatic brain injury. Doesn't mean they all won't. We can't clump them into one group there. So understanding again what the functional limitation might be with each of those. And with that said, there's people in our lives that have disabilities. Think of our senior population. Do you have an aging parent or grandparent? Do they recognize that they now have a disability? When we talk about the aging network, the manual I flashed at you at the beginning there, note it says disability and aging. Why different with aging? Because while disabilities become prevalent or present, that's not recognized, and it's not always identified as a disability. Oftentimes it's not identified as a disability. My mother-in-law, who since passed, had hearing aid and had the TV on 50 and still told me to keep it quiet in the kitchen when I was doing the dishes. Did she have hearing loss? She had more than hearing loss. She was hard of hearing, maybe even defined as deaf, what we would call late deafened, not recognizing that though. So on and so forth. People have critical information readily available, which is also tools we provide. As a matter of fact, your state has as many of you are aware of, the MARC, Mid-America Regional Council, which has an outstanding tool that we use nationwide that has a excellent source of ability to identify your meds and other critical information. Not just establishing one, how do I do that? Again, defined as well, and personal needs ready to go. I sit on the National Fire Protection Association's Disability Accessibility Review and Advisory Committee, DRAC we call it, NFPA DRAC. So this comes from that. And as I said at the beginning, this audience is eclectic. While many people in this room probably know this page, the disability community does not. And we make it inherent upon them to take this information back, including the tools I just mentioned, the MARC tool on the personal preparedness inventory. What are on their websites? What information do they have that they're sharing with their constituents? Because where do they go? They're going to talk to the deaf community. Is going to talk to the deaf community. What does the Deaf Commission have on their website? So notification, and again, defining it, wayfinding, use of the way, and then assistance. What assistance might I need? If you're not aware of, the NFPA already has a tool, which is one of the 3 tools we provide in this program model specific to personal preparedness and planning. They have an evacuation guide for people with disabilities. That was round 2. We have the 3rd edition coming out, which has been done for about a year and still sitting in their legal lease review. They have an extensive one, to say the least. So we have a new model coming out, but the current tool is still functional. The new model is much more compact and easy to use. It cuts to the chase, if you will. Basically, we're going from 67 pages to 17 pages. So I guess you could say we're cutting out about 50 pages of some might call fluff. I think there's still some functional information on there. Point being, NFPA.org, evacuation for people with disabilities tool. You can access now. We provide that in the manual and the new tools coming out. And then defining network of supports, who counts on you? Who do you count on? And you say, well, if there's a person with disability, they would count on someone. No, again, there could be very functional purposes. Someone who, say, is a wheelchair user could also be a conduit and a network of support person for someone who, say, has a cognitive disability, who could be relied on to be called on before, say, they call 911 because they cut their finger as opposed to using a bandage. So different scenarios that could play out there. Advanced warnings, contacting someone to say, what should I do here? Knowing who's in your circle. People's ability to assess their own capabilities. Some can, some can't. Can't think of seniors, think of people with cognitive disabilities. Conversely, most of my colleagues who are deaf and blind don't have a cognitive disability, but they might need assistance for something that would say would be visual, of course, or specific to general effective communication as far as people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Teaching people how to assist and how their devices operate. Identifying members of their support network and utilizing those members, meeting with them. What might my plan be? Individuals who may need assistance in establishing their network. Where do I start? And then the care with use supplies, which we do have a full array of everything you need to know about to-go kits, the 5 different to-go kits and everything that would go with that. Some consider Administrator Fugate the best female administrator we've had. Note the timeline here, Katrina, August 2005. This is a direct spinoff of the Post-Katrina Act and his point of speaking to the ad hoc committee. In 2011, I was invited to the White House when Administrator Fugate and the National Disability Rights Network signed the Memorandum of Understanding that FEMA would be responsive to the disability community, and some of the tools that I've already shown you are an offshoot of that. And there continues to be some movement. We'd like to see a little bit more movement specific to the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. The first director was outstanding, Marcy Roth, who's actually also contracted to be a player in this. She's considered, for all intent and purposes, the international guru around this topic, and she is built into this grant as well, and will be speaking to our audiences in some way, shape, or form when we come around the state. And then the legal guidance, again, some of you know this much better than I, and 6 and 8 are where we would, in essence, find the disability or access and functional needs content. And then emergency management under Title II. Why website accessibility? Because where do people go for information? How does our municipality's website read from an accessibility standpoint? And to be honest with you, this is a big topic out there that there's a lot of, quite frankly, lawsuits going against any place that doesn't have an accessible website. As a matter of fact, I was just told today how a local college just got hit for not having an accessible website, but told it about an hour ago. ADA coordinator notice of grievance procedure. By federal law, you should have an ADA coordinator in your municipality if there's 50 or more employees, which allows us to also tap into someone within our municipality who can assist us on disability direction. This audience knows this, the ESFs well, so I don't need to go any further with this. I always say let's learn from the lawsuits. The first lawsuit was Oakland, the second was Los Angeles, the third was New York City. The reason our state funded this program is because a municipality, albeit a massive one, lost a lawsuit in response to people with disabilities and access and functional needs. There was the University of Maryland has the Department of Homeland. Let's see, let me get this right. Homeland and Emergency Response. I'm not getting it right, but I'm close. Where Elizabeth Webster, an attorney there, in essence, diagnosed all 3 lawsuits and summarized them. And that's actually some material we provide in there. I find it good reading for people in this audience because it does define what happened with the lawsuits and the issues across those lawsuits. Building evacuation, accessible transportation, shelters and evacuation centers. What is accessibility? What do we need to have in there? Quiet areas, sensory kits. Power outages, again, a major issue, not always easily addressed. Communications, I mentioned the term general effective communication. By law, all municipalities, amongst other entities, like the university I'm in, amongst other higher institutes of higher education, must also have accessible communications. And then the recovery process. We also are the lead trainers for the Federal Fire Department of New York, or FDNY. They brought us in. Actually, they got sucked into the New York City lawsuit. None too pleased were they, by the way, but sucked into the lawsuit, which was New York City OEM. And now all of their fire and EMS get disability awareness training through our program, built into a context specific to this training model. They got brought in based on building evacuation and high rises. The lawsuit against New York City, again, learning from lawsuits, the failure of the evacuation plans to accommodate the needs of people with disabilities with respect to high-rise evacuation and accessible transportation. There's your FDNY bring in right there. Fair of the shelter plans require that the shelter system be sufficiently accessible. That a person going to shelters with steps in them. There's no such thing as a special needs shelter, folks, as I think most of you or all of you are aware. And going to a school district in front of her, school in front of her with steps, saying, being told, your shelter will be 10 blocks up the road at 52nd and Lexington. How can that be? It can't be. The Fair of New York City to have a plan for ensuring that people with disabilities are able to access the services provided by the city after an emergency. Fair the plan to provide for accessible communications. Again, I'll give a little bit more. We define all this in depth and we address these topic areas. Nothing we show here is not addressed. So we're telling you how we got to where we're at and what we bring in to address those areas. Fair of the city's outreach and education program to provide people with disabilities the same opportunity as others to develop a personal emergency plan. Hence the reason we provide those tools, and I'll show you one more before I depart today. The city's lack of sufficient plans to provide people with disabilities information about the existence and location of accessible services in an emergency. So go back to website accessibility, for instance. That's obviously pre, and this is also addressing during. What the Department of Justice did a few years after the ADA, American Disabilities Act, went signed into law, which was July 26, 1990, was realizing that a lot of municipalities were not becoming ADA compliant, which is a whole bunch of topic areas, this just being one of them. So what they did was they would actually show up in municipalities, which this has been dormant. We're looking to bring it back. But the DOJ would show up on a Monday morning, and I'm trying to remember these cities in your state that have been visited. So I know New Orleans showed up on a Monday morning in New Orleans, and Niagara Falls has been, actually where I am, has been visited, and said open up the books. They move in for about 2 weeks and they look at everything. So what you're seeing here is one citation specific to one county's emergency operation plan. So I'm sorry that A should be dropped there. So if you bear with my inappropriate formatting here, EOPs will include procedures to solicit, receive, and use input from people with a variety of disabilities. You have to do it. So when we talk about the inclusive planning, we teach you how to do that, and that must be a part of it. There's an expectation clearly that input has to come from everyone, and it makes your job, people's job, much easier to be responsive to. Community evacuation plans to enable people who have mobility disabilities, are blind or have low vision, are deaf or hard of hearing, have cognitive disabilities, mental illness to safely self-evacuate or to be evacuated by others. Emergency warning systems effective for the deaf and hard of hearing, and shelters have a backup generator, and so on here. I won't read the whole thing to you. Continuing. People who use service animals are not separated from them. We define service animals. We actually have developed our own video for service animals. Emotional support animals, comfort dogs, therapy dogs are not covered under the ADA. It's amazing how many people with emotional support animals think they have the same rights, which actually puts service animals in jeopardy. That service animal is a $40,000 animal that allows the person to live independently. And with that independent living, all of us, community as well, is better off. That's the objective, live independently. So we can't have those animals separated or certainly need to be properly responded to. Then plans for providing equivalent opportunities for accessible post-emergency temporary housing to people with disabilities. So we have a concept that we talk about, I don't have a page for it in this, I don't believe, is universal design or universal accessibility, which means, I like to put it in simple terms. We've all walked up to, none of us have walked up to a ramp and said, where's the stairs? But I've walked up the stairs with my son and said, where's the ramp? None of us have cared about a lever faucet on a sink or a lever on a door. but people have gone up to door knobs, or other appliances like that and not been able to use them. Point being that universal accessibility we all can utilize. When we have limited or archaic design, some people are not able to access, which puts them in a bad spot and quite frankly can expose our municipalities and our services. So the federal law, what we look to address is the Title II, the ADA coordinator, as I referenced, Project Civic Access, which is the program that you just saw a minute ago. That was one spinoff of the emergency services piece. They do 911, law enforcement, sidewalks, polling places, new builds, et cetera, Project Civic Access. You just saw the emergency management review of one county, and accessibility. The term I just used, universal accessibility. We all can benefit from it. Hey, we're all aging. Someday we're going to need to be void of stairs. We're going to need the ramp. So we look at it in that context. And then who is active as far as people with disabilities being a part of that? Our town's had a committee on disabilities for 14 years. We work directly with the town. We alleviate some of the challenges they have, and quite frankly, we get assignments. This is not just this group of people that's saying what to do. It spins it back around where the assignments come from town supervisors, emergency managers, chiefs of police, so on and so forth, in assisting. It's a collaborative partnership. What does the federal law say specific to this topic area? All of this. So everything that, some of which we've somewhat referenced here, is all built into the law. So from a emergency planning standpoint, this is all recognized. If we're not doing this, we are not compliant with the law, and we want to be sure that people are aware of that. So part of our responsibility is, quite frankly, to put you in a position where you're never going to be in that position of doubt or question. I often say when audiences come through my training that you know more about this topic than many people, professionals that you think would know more, like teachers, medical professionals. And the intent is not to give you anything that they necessarily need to know, but knowing how this comes to play enhances you in many ways, well beyond your line of work. As a municipality, you must have an ADA coordinator if you have 50 or more employees. You must have ability for someone to understand that the Title II requirements, which Title II is what municipalities fall under. There must be a grievance procedure where I can file a complaint, which is a good thing. We want to take complaints internally. We don't want them to go to the Department of Justice. We'll listen to that first. Have a transition plan. Review your facilities and services, the tools that we provide you specific to this topic. And addressing accessibility, having disability awareness for all your employees. When we do this program, you receive the entire program, not just the manual. You receive the PowerPoint presentation. Why I do that is it allows you to go back and educate your professionals specific to the areas in here. I wouldn't envision you doing the entire piece, but you're going to pick and choose what's specific to your audience, your personnel, and be able to do that with them. Also being able to connect with other individuals who are in that audience who can also do, say, disability awareness training. A FEMA slide here, that note here says people are going to have specific roles and responsibilities. And they're going to be assigned by people in this audience. We can't separate planning to address access and functional needs. It needs to be built in. So the concept's the whole community, going back to when we saw the earlier slide, and I mentioned 60 to 70% off the access and functional needs definition. This oval graph here, if you will, is accurate by population. So how much of your population is people with access and functional needs? Note people with disabilities in that circle, if you will, oval. That's about accurate, again, the size. So understand the magnitude of the people we're talking about per municipality. What does it mean to be whole planning? Looks beyond traditional government-centric approach to emergency planning. Use those supports. So when we had our core advisory group, which is one of the ultimate objectives here, for Erie County, that's where Buffalo is, that's where I live. I work in Niagara County. Now we're large, we're almost 1 million people in Erie County, just short. But we had a core advisory group, which is the Emergency Management Office, Department of Health, and the disability community. We'd been meeting for about 4 years before the pandemic. When the pandemic struck, we met every Friday for the first 20 weeks. We dealt with issues within 5 days of them occurring. When a person went to a testing site who was a wheelchair user, got dropped off by the paratransit, the public transit provider, for a drive-up test, and was denied because he was not in a vehicle, we addressed that within 2 days. The county was very happy that it was a state testing site, not a county testing site, but that never happened again. Who best to call them? The county, who called the state and said, what are you doing? Oops. Our points of distribution, our pods, were all assessed for accessibility about 4 years prior to the pandemic. When we used them for testing and vaccination sites, we knew they were accessible in advance. We did that. We didn't ask the emergency manager to go out and do a review. Why would he or she? Who knows this better? That was our job. We were assigned that. Why deal with these challenges on your own? What's accessibility? Let's get the people to know it. Use those community resources, community partners, engage them, leverage them. Responsibilities, expand your reach. Deaf Access Services of Western New York reached out constantly. We were using them, of course, as a conduit, amongst other avenues, to inform the deaf community. And then when we did a vaccination site, we did it at St. Mary's School for the Deaf. Why? Comfort level. I know there's going to be other deaf people here that would be able to communicate. And then the core advisory group, as I've referenced and leading up to, we provide this tool. We talk about how to achieve it. It's necessary. I had an excellent meeting yesterday with the Merck and learned a lot from Mike Harris and Sarah Allen and Lisa Job about your LEPCs and LEPDs and how we would most likely develop core advisory groups in the context of each district, and how to achieve that and what to do to make that going. And I should say this too, folks. The program is, I never leave you. The intent is to become state or regionally self-sufficient, and you have an outstanding model. Your SEMA Access and Functional Needs Committee is a model I talk about in other states. Louisiana is something similar, but yours is better represented. Louisiana does have a good program. New Jersey has a good program. We have nothing in our state. I just recently met with the governor's office and spoke about what other states are doing, referencing what you have. So we come into this walking fast, maybe even running. So it's my intent is to pull all this together with your input. This is a group project, not a one-person presentation project. So how do we do that? Right here. You're using those community partners to plan. We're learning how to communicate. Where do I get an ASL interpreter? I show you how to get an ASL interpreter in your hand right now. What is accessible sheltering? Evacuation and transportation, obviously always linked, because most of the time we're going to evacuate through transportation. What if I don't have it? And then the recovery process, and of course, training exercises need to involve the community. I just was a victim actor for our airport's plane crash scenario 3 weeks ago, but our core advisory group made sure we had the deaf community there, 5 people, the blind community there, 5 people, 2 service animals, 2 wheelchair users, someone with intellectual disability, Down syndrome. So it was representation, not putting a blindfold on someone or sticking someone in a wheelchair. That doesn't work either. And then just in last couple of minutes here, this is the FEMA recovery model, CMIST, and we define this more at length, of course, but some of the tools that assist us in understanding where it comes from the disability community, but what the emergency management process should be in understanding how to do this. Just the challenges of maintaining health, not improving health, just the ability to maintain someone's health, maintain my independence, minus my service animal, my power wheelchair. My independence is very well, most likely will be gone. So I think I've done that, and okay, perfect timing. Here's our website again. Please access it. Take a look at the Missouri specific disability organizations at your fingertips. Again, already produced because of our first responder presence in your state. That's my direct office line. That's my email. Feel free to email me on anything I've just talked about here today, which would include your input, your questions. When we become a Brown regionally, I do stress to try to make that program because it most likely won't be a second time around. And then we also do follow up when people attend. It's more than training. I don't like the word training because oftentimes we go to training and then we do what the next day? Go back to the grind. We will follow up and see that activities are being carried out. And that's the expectation, quite frankly, of our funding. And remember, folks, we are in your state for law enforcement. We will be in Greene County and the Missouri State Highway Law Enforcement Academy. Let's see, looking here, I believe that's, when are we? Either October 31, 1, 2, 3, or November 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're coming. If you're in law enforcement, please be sure. Missouri State Highway Patrol has built us into their academy, as is the Missouri Sheriff's Association, KCPD. Joplin was going to do that. St. Louis Fire does this as well. It's built it in. 911 were commissioned. So please, I can't go without noting that those programs, but we will end sometime in the middle of next year. I am open for questions or comments. Ashley, anything in the chat box that I should respond to?
I do not have anything in the chat box.
Okay. Mike is great.
And
That's in the chat box. Mike is great in the chat box.
That was me. I'm partial to Mike.
So questions, folks, anyone? Earl, thank you. You're
and if
welcome,
you guys
Jennifer.
would like to come off of mute to ask a question or to give David your comments or feedback, please feel free to do so. And if you need help, raise your hand and we can take you off of mute.
Oh, I do want to show you this before this is the one tool that we have, and feel free to come off of mute. I'll be ready for you. This is the Disaster Readiness Planning Guide, which we inherited. This was a FEMA grant that in essence created this, which also included what they call the Inclusive Preparedness Center. These gentlemen have since aged. I established a good relationship with them. These actually would cost $1 a piece. This is the guide that most of the people, if not all the people on this call, would be receiving, where it defines on how you would work with someone so that they can develop their own disaster readiness planner. These would, as I said, these were expensive. We have now inherited this. They turned over copyright to us. So the states that we are in will be receiving these in mass. So we are these are some of the tools that will come to the state, but we also want to put the Missouri stamp on here as well. So again, some of the tools there.
David, there was a comment in the chat. Holly said, "Thank you for this information. My late husband was on crutches for 5 years, and this world is not truly accessible for everyone. It is very frustrating." Waylon said, "Oh, sorry, go ahead."
Oh, go ahead. I'm just a comment on that. We in the United States are, as I understand it, the most accessible country in the world. We still are challenged with that. It's not hard to achieve what we're talking about. It just takes the right attitude and the understanding. So I hear what you're saying. It's difficult. I live it with my son. My lived experience is my son's disability. He was the one in the video that played baseball and used to go to church. So I appreciate your comments, and our objective is to transcend that.
Wayland says, "Great information to know working in an EHS division of SEMA, and Sarah is attending your class on Monday in Nebraska."
There you go. Let me talk to you about that before let's just have a chat about that because I want to catch you on that. All right, folks, if there's nothing, please, again, feel free to reach out to me. Utilize what we've talked about. Check out our website. And we look forward to you both attending and sharing our information as we come across the state. I am also certainly open, although the Sarah and Lisa yesterday extremely helpful in also pointing out that we will be that they'll be able to assist us in identifying locations. So Sarah, thank you very much. It was a very productive meeting yesterday. Okay, folks, stay well. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.
David, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here. Really appreciate you being here.
Absolutely, Ashley. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you.